Hey everyone, Natalie Madison here of Art is in Cakes, talking about the 5 things I wish I had checked before naming my business. Letting everybody get settled just a moment, and we are ready to go. So let's talk about what's in a name. Well, it's more than just being unforgettable, right? And of course, you don't want to be too unforgettable. After you develop your name, be sure to say it a few times and have others say it before committing. Like Salmonella's Waffles and Scoops. You see what I did there, right? I want to welcome everybody here. My name is Natalie Madison. I am the owner of Art is in Cakes and ChefEquation and the new course outline called Baking Up Profits. Super excited here. All of those are under one umbrella, under my original name, Natalie Madison's Artisan Cakes. That's right, Natalie Madison's Artisan Cakes. So let's go through some of the things that I wish I had checked before naming my business. So what did I do wrong? Great question, you ask. Well, first, it was really hard to enunciate. In fact, after the second time, I got to do some really cool news story, and they called it Natalie Madison's Artesian Cakes. And I feel bad for them because they're reading it off of a teleprompter, which moves really quickly. But after they said it twice in a row, I was like, ooh, maybe I might need to think that through a little bit more. Also, another thing I did wrong, when I searched Google, I didn't do a good enough check on those individual names. And there is an artisan bakery. They are phenomenal. Google them if you have an opportunity. But they already had a brand. They had brand awareness. They had different media. They had YouTube videos. They had lots of content. And there were occasionally times where my name would pop up when other people were talking about artisan bakery, even though we weren't related. And they weren't quite trademarked yet, but that could have been an issue in the future. So something to consider. Make sure you're not following a name that is really already belongs to somebody who's well established. Also, with my personal name included, Natalie Madison, I didn't have an exit strategy. Wasn't something I didn't even consider, not even considered. It's like, what do I want to do if I want to retire or sell out? Also, one more major mistake, the URL was way too long. So somebody trying to remember to type in Natalie Madison's Artisan Cakes, .com, insane. They couldn't remember it. So I ended up having to abbreviate it to just NM Artisan Cakes, and it lost some of its brand awareness. So all of this, of course, led to a rebrand. And that rebrand meant months and months of reworking my web pages, my social media handles, my position on Google, my logos, and more, so much more. Oh my gosh, so much more. All right, ChefEquation, I decided to do things a little bit different. And ChefEquation went through 40 different renditions before we landed on a name. Yes, I'm telling you straight, 40 different renditions. What is ChefEquation, you ask? I'm so glad you asked, because it's scheduled to release at the end of the year. There will be a corresponding 8-week course designed to automate areas of your business so you can save time, energy, and profit to reinvest in yourself. Now, we are planning to host a founding members buy-in where the course will be at its absolute lowest price, never to be listed at that price again. Why? Because I need a handful of amazing students who will help go through this course with me and give feedback and constructive criticism, of course, without being mean. So I will select a handful of people to go through this first course at $249. It will never be this low again. In fact, that's half the price of our planned launch at the beginning of the year. So if you have any interest in that, no pressure at this point, but if you want to send me an email at questions@artisincakes.com and say, hey, yeah, I want to be a founding member, we'll continue that conversation. So back to ChefEquation. What was I looking for when establishing this name? And what did I do to determine that the name was better than the other 39? Some were already taken. Some were associated with similar content or associated with things that I really didn't want to be lumped in with. Some were too feminine. Some were too masculine. Some didn't quite fit the brand as I planned it to be 10 years from now. Some didn't, quite embody the long-term future of ChefEquation. And then also, some weren't appealing enough to be considered purchasable by future buyers. I am a strong proponent of trademarking your names. And you may ask, is ChefEquation trademarked? Why, yes, it is. And so is Baking Up Profits. Both show up under the USPTO.gov's trademark search. The application takes about 4 months for the final stamp of approval, but trademarks, they are a big deal. So before you choose a name, please search your name phrase at USPTO.gov trademarks under the TESS search, known as the test search. You want to put your entire name phrase in there. Of course, not your name. So if you're including your name, just skip that. But if you are saying artisan cakes as part of your name, you would want to search that particular phrase to see if anybody else has already claimed it. So what happens if you infringe on someone else's name that might be trademarked? Well, that usually leads to a cease and desist order. And unfortunately, that order won't come until 2 years down the line, once you're fully branded. That's when you start showing up in Google searches, and then the next thing you know, you've been asked to take everything down associated with that name, which leads to a big 0404 page not found error. And it takes a good deal of effort to rebrand. You know, I was really fortunate in that I was able to rebrand while simultaneously keeping the other. And since it wasn't trademarked, I was able to keep the name Natalie Madison's Artisan Cakes LLC as my parent, and my trade name Art is in Cakes developed shortly thereafter. So another thing to check is to see if it's already used by someone, established, but not yet trademarked. And that's where Artisan Bakery comes in. So when I looked them up, yeah, they were really well established. While they didn't have the trademark already, they definitely had a niche on that market. Like, they had targeted that market. So put your name in Google, search it, flip beyond page 1, and find out what that phrase might already be attached to before you commit. Also, is it associated with content you'd rather not be associated with? Say, for example, on YouTube or a random blog. So one of the names that I absolutely loved, I mean, oh my gosh, ChefEquation was fabulous, but I had some really cool ones. But one in particular, when I searched on YouTube, there was kind of a slapstick comedy version of really poor in the kitchen making stuff, and I'm like, oh yeah, I don't want somebody looking me up and finding that instead. So look through other social media handles and make sure that your name phrase doesn't already exist by somebody else with content that you don't want to be associated with. You also want to check to see if your URL is available without having to add reworks and acronyms of your name. And then, of course, you want to check to make sure all social media handles are available. So a couple of the great names in lieu of ChefEquation, while we were able to find a URL available, they had a Facebook page, Instagram was taken, or YouTube was taken. And you want to make sure that all of those social media and URLs work hand in hand. So if you Google search ChefEquation, it has its own Facebook page and Instagram page. It's got its own Twitter, and it's all with the username @ChefEquation. If you can do that, you'll be golden from this point out. All right, one more thing to consider. Would someone want to buy your brand, including its name, when you decide to sell? What? Yeah. So when considering a name, think ahead 1 year from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now. Where will you be? How will you grow? How will you expand? And also, very important, how do you plan to exit? Exit, you ask? Yeah. I mean, what happens when you retire and choose to sell your business? This beautiful brand that you've worked so hard to create, especially if you've spent the last 20 years creating it. You want it to stay intact, to keep its integrity, even when you decide to move on. So this is why I always caution people about using their name now that I know, caution you to using your name inside your business name itself. Because I hate to say it, but if there's this cute little bakery on the side street that's been established for 40 years, but a name is attached to it, it's going to be really hard to sell that later on. I'll give you a couple of examples. Here locally, you know, we have patty cakes in Conway. We love patty cakes. Most people think, they simply assume, they think that it is part of, you know, that Patty Cakes Bakery Man nursery rhyme. Great play on words because it also includes Patty Stovall's first name, which we love and adore. So this one works. But let's say your name was John's Edible Bakery Products or something like that, you know. It's going to be really hard to remove a person's name from the definition or the branding of that particular business. You want it to stay intact, you want it to keep its integrity, even when you decide to move on. Now, things to consider before licensing your business name and building your brand. This is a quick recap. First, you want to check, is it trademarked? Go to uspto.gov and search under trademarks. Do the TESS search. Is it already in use by someone who is well established and could claim first rights in a trademark war? So Google search them, like Google search your name phrase and see if anybody else is already using it in a big way. Again, is it associated with content that you'd rather not be accidentally linked with? Google search your name in a variety of different formats, all right? Are the URL and social media handles available on all platforms? Because you're going to want to brand it as your name on all platforms. And lastly, would someone want to buy your brand and its name when you decide to leave? One bonus item check, is your name easy to remember? If it's impossible to remember it, you know, ask a few of your friends, say, hey, I've got this idea, this is my name, and then ask them 3 days later, hey, do you remember that name that I came up with for my business? If they can't remember, you might want to reconsider it, some different format. All right, now to stay informed, visit chefequation.com and opt into our announcements. If you're watching this from Crowdcast, you're actually going to see a little opt-in button down below. You'll get my PDF on cottage baking in Arkansas as a bonus download. Next Monday, we're planning on doing the same thing with a demonstration of my personal and preferred setup for photographing cakes and cookies for Instagram-worthy feeds with many examples. We watched an ASB/TDC, if you don't know what that is, you know, send me a message later, an ASB/TDC webinar. And within that webinar on photographing product photography, it was just a little too broad, so it didn't necessarily hit on our specific niche. So we're going to talk about how I use similar setup for my personal and preferred setup of photographing my cakes and cookies. For full access to the Q&A segment of this video and more, make sure to check out our Patreon page for full details.